Admiral Jake Morrison stood at the viewport of his flagship, watching the stars that had once seemed so welcoming. 37 years had passed since humanity first made contact with the Galactic Council, and those years had been filled with wonder and discovery. Human colonies now dotted 17 star systems, and Earth's children had spread their wings across the galaxy like never before. But today felt different, and Jake could sense trouble brewing in the cold darkness of space. The communication came at dawn Earth time, when most of the Admiralty was still sleeping. Jake had been reviewing patrol reports from the outer colonies when his aide, Lieutenant Commander Pete Walsh, burst through the door with a look of pure shock on his face. The message was from Council Prime Zethkar himself, and it was marked with the highest priority seals. Jake read it twice before the full meaning hit him like a hammer blow. The Galactic Council was demanding that humanity cease all expansion beyond the Sol system immediately. Every human colony was to be placed under Council oversight, and all advanced artificial intelligence research had to be surrendered to Council authorities. The message used diplomatic language, but the meaning was crystal clear. Humanity was being told to stop growing or face the consequences. Dr. Lisa Grant arrived at Fleet Headquarters within an hour of Jake's emergency call. She had been Earth's chief xenobiologist and diplomatic advisor since first contact, and her understanding of alien psychology was unmatched among humans. Lisa studied the Council's demands with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades learning how alien minds worked. Her conclusion was disturbing, but not surprising. The Council was afraid of humanity and had been for several years now. Human expansion had been faster than any species in recorded galactic history, and human technology was advancing at a rate that made older species nervous. Humans adapted to new environments with frightening ease, and their ability to innovate seemed limitless. What the Council saw as dangerous unpredictability, humans called creativity and resourcefulness. Jake and Lisa met with President Karen Hayes in the secure conference room beneath the Pentagon. Karen had led Earth through some of its most challenging years since joining the galactic community, and her decision today would shape humanity's future for generations to come. The three of them sat around the polished table, while holographic displays showed the positions of Council fleets throughout human space. Karen read the ultimatum aloud, and her voice grew harder with each word. The Council wanted humanity to accept guidance overseers on every human world and submit all major decisions to Council approval. Human ships would be restricted to pre-approved flight paths, and human research would be monitored by Council scientists. It was not partnership, but subjugation dressed up in polite words. Lisa pulled up her research files and showed them what she had discovered about other species that had received similar ultimatums in the past. The Kalari had been a promising young race with expanding colonies until the Council decided they were growing too fast. Within 20 years, the Kalari had mysteriously stopped expanding, and their technology had stagnated. The same pattern had repeated with 4 other species over the past 2 centuries. The method was always the same and always effective. First came the warnings about galactic stability and the need for responsible growth. Then came the oversight and monitoring systems that slowly strangled innovation. Finally came the gradual reduction of the species to a minor role in galactic affairs. The Council had perfected the art of crushing potential rivals while maintaining the appearance of benevolent guidance. Jake accessed classified military intelligence that showed Council ship movements over the past 6 months. The pattern was unmistakable, and Council fleets had been quietly positioning themselves near human systems while maintaining the pretense of routine patrols. If humanity rejected the ultimatum, the Council was ready to enforce compliance through military action. The discussion that followed lasted 8 hours and covered every possible option from complete compliance to total war. Karen weighed each choice carefully while Jake and Lisa provided their expertise. Compliance would mean the slow death of human ambition and innovation. Resistance would mean facing an enemy with thousands of years of technological advancement and military experience. But there was another factor that none of them could ignore, and that was the human spirit itself. Throughout history, humans had faced impossible odds and found ways to survive and thrive. From the earliest tribes fighting for territory to the space pioneers who had first reached for the stars, humans had never accepted limitations imposed by others. The idea of bowing to council demands went against everything humanity represented. Karen made her decision as the sun set over Washington. Earth would reject the council ultimatum and accept whatever consequences followed. She would not be the president who surrendered human freedom for the promise of safety. The message she sent back to Council Prime Zethkar was brief and polite, but absolutely clear. Humanity declined the council's generous offer of guidance and would continue to chart its own course among the stars. The council's response came within hours, and it was not a message, but a fleet. Long-range sensors detected council warships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of human territory. The ships took up positions around major human systems and began broadcasting warnings to all human vessels. The age of peaceful coexistence was over, and humanity was about to learn what happened to species that defied the will of the Galactic Council. Jake stood again at his viewport watching those distant stars, but now they no longer seemed welcoming. They had become a battlefield where humanity would either prove its right to exist as a free species or be crushed beneath the weight of galactic authority. The Council had made their move, and now it was humanity's turn to respond. What they did not know was that humans had been preparing for this possibility since the day they first left Earth. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you cornered a species that had clawed its way to the top of its own world's food chain. Captain Roy Fisher watched the Council fleet through the observation deck of Fortress Prime and counted 37 enemy vessels hanging in space like vultures waiting for carrion. The massive defense station orbited between Earth and Mars and represented humanity's first line of defense against whatever the galaxy might throw at them. Roy had commanded the station for 5 years, but he had never faced anything like this. The Council blockade had been in place for 6 weeks, and the effects were already showing throughout human space. Trade routes that had carried goods between human colonies for decades were now patrolled by automated Council drones that destroyed any ship attempting to cross their boundaries. Human vessels that ventured beyond the designated safety zones simply vanished, and their crews were never heard from again. Engineer Maya Lopez worked in the lower levels of Fortress Prime, studying the wreckage of a Council scout ship that had strayed too close to the station's defenses. The alien technology was unlike anything humans had encountered before, and Maya spent 18-hour days trying to understand how it functioned. Her breakthrough came when she realized that Council systems relied heavily on quantum entanglement networks that connected their ships across vast distances. The discovery meant that Council fleets could coordinate their actions instantaneously, regardless of how far apart they were positioned. But it also meant they had a potential weakness that could be exploited if humans could find a way to disrupt those quantum connections. Maya began working on theoretical solutions, while Council propaganda broadcasts filled human communication, channels with messages about the benefits of accepting Council guidance. Dr. Lisa Grant received an encrypted message through diplomatic channels that surprised her more than anything that had happened since the crisis began. The message came from Councillor Vrix of the Serpentine Coalition, and it requested a secret meeting to discuss the current situation. Lisa knew that Vrix represented one of the more moderate factions within the Council, but she had never expected any Council member to reach out during active hostilities. The meeting took place in neutral space aboard a small diplomatic vessel that belonged to an independent trading guild. Vrix was a reptilian being whose scales shifted color based on emotional state, and Lisa could see that the counselor was deeply troubled by recent events. The conversation that followed revealed cracks in the Council's unity that humans had not suspected existed. Several Council species were uncomfortable with the extreme measures being taken against humanity, and Vrix represented a growing faction that believed the current approach was both morally wrong and strategically dangerous. The Council had always maintained its authority through a combination of technological superiority and political unity, but both were beginning to show signs of strain. Some species questioned whether humanity truly posed the threat that hardliners claimed. Meanwhile, Admiral Jake Morrison was implementing contingency plans that had been developed in secret over many years. Earth's military leadership had always known that conflict with the Council was possible, and they had prepared accordingly. Operation Prometheus was the codename for humanity's total war doctrine, and it represented a complete shift from defensive thinking to offensive action. The first test of human resolve came when Council forces attempted to establish overseer stations on 3 human colonies. The aliens expected minimal resistance from what they considered a primitive species, but they encountered something they had never faced before. Human colonists fought with a ferocity that shocked Council commanders who were accustomed to species that submitted to superior authority. Captain Roy Fisher received orders to engage Council scouts that were probing Fortress Prime's defenses, and the battle that followed marked the first direct military confrontation between humans and the Galactic Council. Human weapons technology was less advanced than Council equivalents, but human tactics were unlike anything the aliens had encountered. Where Council doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower and rigid formations, humans relied on mobility and unpredictable attack patterns. The engagement lasted 6 hours and ended with 2 Council vessels destroyed and a third badly damaged. Roy's own losses were minimal, but the psychological impact was enormous. For the first time in centuries, Council forces had been defeated in direct combat by a species they considered inferior. The news spread through both human and Council space faster than official communications could suppress it. Maya Lopez made another crucial discovery while examining debris from the destroyed Council ships, and she found that their quantum entanglement systems were more fragile than she had initially believed. A properly designed electromagnetic pulse could disrupt the connections temporarily, and a computer virus might be able to cause permanent damage to the entire network. She began developing prototypes while Council reinforcements arrived to strengthen the blockade. The Council's response to their tactical defeat was predictably brutal, and they began targeting civilian installations that they claimed were being used to support military operations. A human medical station in the Centauri system was destroyed with all hands aboard, including dozens of doctors and nurses who had been treating injured colonists. The attack violated every treaty governing warfare, but Council leadership justified it as necessary to prevent further human resistance. President Karen Hayes watched the reports of civilian casualties with growing anger and authorized Admiral Morrison to expand Operation Prometheus beyond its original parameters. If the Council wanted to escalate the conflict, then humanity would accommodate them, but on human terms rather than alien ones. The gloves were coming off, and the galaxy was about to see what humans were capable of when they stopped playing by other people's rules. Underground resistance movements formed on every human world that had accepted Council overseers, and they used guerrilla tactics that completely baffled alien occupying forces. Council soldiers were trained to fight conventional battles against organized military units, but they had no experience dealing with civilian populations that refused to accept defeat. Human colonists who had been farmers and shopkeepers just weeks earlier became fighters who struck without warning and disappeared into populations that supported them completely. The siege was entering a new phase, and both sides were learning hard lessons about their opponents. The Council was discovering that conquering humanity required more than superior technology and overwhelming numbers. Humans were proving that determination and creativity could overcome apparent disadvantages when the stakes were high enough. The real war was just beginning, and neither side fully understood what they had started. Colonel Dan Rivers crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been a Council communication tower and checked his equipment one final time. His special operations team had been on the surface of New Geneva for 3 days, preparing for this mission, and everything depended on perfect timing. The Council Overseer base stretched out before them like a metallic cancer growing on the surface of what had been a peaceful human colony. The resistance movement on New Geneva had grown, from a handful of angry colonists to a coordinated network of fighters who knew every building and back alley in their cities. Dan's job was to turn that local knowledge into effective military action against an enemy that still believed humans were too primitive to pose a serious threat. The Council was about to learn how wrong they were. Chief Scientist Amy Price worked in a classified laboratory buried 3 kilometers beneath the Colorado mountains, where she led Earth's most secret weapons development program. Her team had been studying Maya Lopez's discoveries about Council quantum networks, and they had made a breakthrough that could change the entire course of the war. The virus they had created was unlike anything that had ever existed, and it was specifically designed to target the quantum entanglement systems that held Council technology together. The weapon was elegant in its simplicity, and it used the Council's own network connections against them, like a disease spreading through a body. Once introduced into any Council system, the virus would replicate itself and spread to every connected device across their entire fleet. The best part was that Council security systems were designed to prevent physical attacks rather than information warfare, and they would never see it coming. Ambassador Kethmore of the Crystalline Assembly arrived at Earth aboard a heavily escorted diplomatic vessel carrying what he claimed was the Council's final offer for peaceful resolution. The ambassador was a being of living crystal whose thoughts created patterns of light that flickered across his transparent surface, and he represented the last moderate voice willing to negotiate with humanity. His arrival created a brief hope that war might still be avoided. The negotiations took place in Geneva, where human and alien diplomats sat across from each other in a room that had once hosted peace talks between human nations. Kethmore's offer was generous by Council standards, but utterly unacceptable to any free people. Humanity could keep the Sol system and 3 colony worlds, but would abandon all other territories and submit to permanent Council monitoring. It was surrender disguised as compromise. President Karen Hayes listened to the ambassador's presentation with the patience of someone who had already made her decision, but was willing to hear all options before acting. When Kethmore finished speaking, Karen's response was simple and direct. Humanity would never accept limitations on its growth or freedom, and any attempt to impose such restrictions would be met with total resistance. The ambassador left Earth knowing that war was now inevitable. Dan Rivers launched his assault on the New Geneva Overseer base at exactly midnight local time when Council security was at its weakest point. His team moved through the facility like ghosts, eliminating sentries and disabling alarm systems with techniques that no Council species had ever encountered. The aliens had superior technology, but humans had something more valuable, which was the ability to adapt and improvise under pressure. The attack succeeded beyond Dan's wildest expectations, and his team captured the entire base along with its Council commander and most of his staff. More importantly, they seized intact examples of Council communication equipment that Amy Price's team could use to test their quantum virus under real conditions. The prisoners were treated according to human military law, but their capture sent shockwaves through Council leadership who had never seen their forces defeated so completely. Maya Lopez successfully tested the quantum disruption technology on a Council patrol ship that had been harassing human supply convoys near Jupiter. The test was conducted in secret using equipment disguised as routine maintenance on a mining station, and the results exceeded all expectations. The Council vessel lost all communication with its fleet, and its navigation systems failed completely, leaving it helpless in space until human ships could rescue the crew. The Council's response to increasing human resistance was to escalate their own tactics, and they began targeting what they claimed were military facilities on civilian worlds. A human research station studying alien plant life was destroyed because it might have been developing biological weapons. A school on Mars was bombed because Council intelligence suggested it was training future soldiers. Each attack pushed humanity closer to total war. The breaking point came when Council forces attacked a human medical ship carrying refugees from contested systems. The vessel Mercy was clearly marked with medical symbols and was broadcasting distress calls when Council interceptors opened fire without warning. 300 civilians died in the attack, including 47 children who had been evacuated from colonies under Council bombardment. The attack was broadcast live across human space by a news crew that had been documenting the refugee crisis, and the images of burning medical bays filled with children's beds sparked something primal in every human who saw them. The Council had made the mistake that conquerors throughout history had repeated, which was believing that superior firepower could break the spirit of people fighting for their homes and families. Admiral Jake Morrison received authorization from President Hayes to implement Protocol Prometheus in its entirety, and for the first time since the crisis began, he smiled. The galaxy had seen human diplomacy and human defense, but it had never seen human warfare unleashed without restraint. Earth's deep space fleet began moving toward jump points, while supply ships loaded ammunition and fuel for an extended campaign. Amy, Price's quantum virus, was loaded into specially modified missiles that would deliver it directly into Council networks during the opening moments of the human counterattack. The virus had been tested extensively and refined until it could spread through quantum connections faster than Council technicians could isolate infected systems. Once it took hold, the entire Council fleet would find itself fighting blind and deaf. Dan Rivers received new orders that expanded his mission from harassment, raids to full-scale offensive operations behind enemy lines. Special Forces teams were deployed to every system where Council forces maintained a presence, and their job was to create chaos and confusion while the main human fleet struck at primary targets. The Council would face attacks from directions they had never considered possible. The spark that would ignite Galactic War had been struck, and now it was spreading like wildfire through human space. The Council had pushed too far and pressured the wrong species, and they were about to discover what happened when predators stopped pretending to be prey. Humanity was coming, and they were bringing fire. Fleet Captain Ben Miller watched 17 Council systems burn simultaneously as human strike forces executed the most coordinated military operation in galactic history. Operation Prometheus had launched at exactly 0800 Universal Time, and within 6 hours, Council forces found themselves under attack across a front that stretched halfway across known space. The aliens had expected human desperation, but what they faced was human precision and fury working in perfect harmony. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship as quantum virus missiles struck their targets throughout the Council fleet network. Amy Price's creations spread through alien systems like digital wildfire, and Council ships that had dominated space for centuries suddenly found themselves blind and helpless. Their quantum communication networks collapsed faster than their technicians could understand what was happening, and coordination between Council forces became impossible. Dr. Nick Torres had spent months studying captured Council personnel, and his psychological profiles of different alien species were proving invaluable in the current offensive. Each species that made up the Council had specific mental weaknesses that could be exploited through targeted propaganda and psychological warfare. The rigid hierarchy that gave the Council its strength also made it vulnerable to attacks that disrupted chain of command. Council Executor Thane Jewell commanded the Council's military response from his flagship in the Hegemony home system and watched in disbelief as reports poured in from across Council space. Human forces were striking with surgical precision at military installations while avoiding civilian targets in a display of restraint that contradicted everything Council intelligence had predicted about human warfare. The primitive species was fighting like a veteran military power. Ben Miller led the assault on the Council's primary fleet construction facility in the Nexus system, where massive shipyards had produced Council warships for over 1,000 years. The human attack force faced overwhelming defensive firepower, but Miller had studied Council tactical doctrine and identified weaknesses that alien commanders never suspected existed. Human ships attacked in unpredictable patterns that confused enemy targeting systems. The battle for the Nexus shipyards lasted 14 hours and ended with the complete destruction of facilities that had taken centuries to build. Human losses were surprisingly light considering the odds they faced, and Miller's tactics became required study material for every human fleet commander. The Council's ability to replace their losses had been crippled in a single engagement that proved human strategic thinking was superior to alien military doctrine, Maya. Lopez monitored quantum virus effectiveness from her laboratory aboard Admiral Morrison's flagship and watched with satisfaction as Council networks collapsed throughout their territory. The virus was performing better than even her most optimistic projections, and it was adapting to Council countermeasures faster than alien programmers could develop them. The technological advantage that had made Council domination possible was crumbling in real time. News of human victories spread through Council space faster than official communications could suppress it, and member species began questioning their leadership for the first time in centuries. Young species that had been forced to accept Council authority saw humans fighting successfully against impossible odds and wondered if they too could resist. The psychological impact of human success was as devastating as the physical damage being inflicted. Dan Rivers coordinated special operations across dozens of systems where his teams struck at Council logistics and communication centers with devastating effectiveness. The aliens had never faced opponents who could blend into civilian populations and strike without warning before disappearing completely. Council security forces were designed to fight conventional battles, but they were helpless against guerrilla warfare tactics. Dr. Torres broadcast carefully crafted messages into Council territory that exploited tensions between different alien species and questioned the competence of Council leadership. His psychological warfare campaign was designed to fracture the unity that held the Council together, and early results suggested that cracks were already appearing in their political structure. Several minor species had begun secret negotiations with human representatives. The Council attempted to rally their forces by declaring humanity a galactic threat that required the united response of all civilized species, but their propaganda campaign backfired when evidence emerged of their systematic oppression of younger species. Human intelligence operatives released classified Council documents that proved the existence of programs designed to suppress any species that might challenge established authority. Executor Thane Jewel launched a massive counterattack aimed at Earth itself, hoping that striking at the human homeworld would force them to abandon their offensive operations. The Council fleet that jumped into the Sol system was the largest military force ever assembled, but they found themselves facing defenses that had been prepared for exactly this scenario. Earth's orbital fortresses and defense platforms were ready. The Battle of Sol lasted 3 days and became the largest space engagement in recorded history. Council forces threw everything they had at Earth's defenses, while human commanders used every trick and tactic they had learned in decades of military planning. The tide turned when Admiral Morrison's returning fleet struck the Council formation from behind, while fresh human reinforcements arrived from Mars and the outer colonies. Ben Miller commanded the reserve fleet that delivered the killing blow. To Council hopes of victory, and his tactical brilliance turned what should have been humanity's darkest hour into their greatest triumph. The Council fleet that had seemed unstoppable just days earlier was completely destroyed, and Executor Thane Jewel himself was captured when his flagship's life support failed after taking massive damage. The victory at Sol marked the beginning of the end for Council resistance as member species throughout their territory began openly defecting to join the human cause. The quantum virus had spread so completely through Council networks that their ability to coordinate large-scale military operations was permanently compromised. Individual systems could still fight, but they could no longer work together effectively. Amy. Price's virus continued evolving and spreading until it had infected every quantum network in Council space, leaving their infrastructure in ruins. The technological superiority that had made Council domination possible was gone forever and would take decades to rebuild, even if they could develop countermeasures. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently in humanity's favor. Maya. Lopez began work on new technologies that would give humans even greater advantages in the continuing war, while Dan Rivers prepared for the final assault on Council strongholds. The fire that humanity had unleashed was consuming everything the Council had built over thousands of years, and there was no way to extinguish it. The galaxy was learning what happened when you pressed humanity too far. Admiral Kyle Brooks arrived at the Council capital system of Prima Hegemony, leading the largest human fleet ever assembled, and found the ancient seat of galactic power defended by less than 30 Council warships. The quantum virus had done its work so thoroughly that most Council vessels could no longer coordinate their movements or communicate with their command structure. What had once been the most powerful military force in the galaxy was now a collection of isolated ships fighting individual battles. Diplomat Helen Carter accompanied the fleet aboard a specially equipped negotiation vessel because someone would need to handle the aftermath of what was about to happen. Helen had spent her entire career studying galactic politics, and she understood that military victory was only the beginning of real change. The old order was dying, but something new would have to take its place, and humans would need to guide that transition carefully. Council Speaker Morden watched human ships fill the space around Prima Hegemony and knew that his civilization's long dominance was ending. The crystalline being had led the Council for over 2 centuries, but had never faced a crisis like this one. Every projection showed that continued resistance would only result in more destruction and loss of life. The time had come to negotiate surrender with a species the Council had fatally underestimated. Admiral Jake Morrison commanded the final assault on the Council capital from his flagship, while reflecting on how much had changed since this conflict began. Humanity had started as the victim of Council aggression, but had become the dominant military power in the galaxy through determination and tactical superiority. The species that aliens had dismissed as primitive was now dictating terms to civilizations, thousands of years older. The battle for Prima Hegemony lasted only 6 hours, because Council defenses collapsed almost immediately when their quantum networks failed. Human forces targeted military installations with surgical precision, while avoiding civilian areas in a demonstration of restraint that impressed neutral observers throughout the galaxy. Even in victory, humanity was showing more honor than the Council had displayed during their reign. Dr. Lisa Grant worked with Helen Carter to analyze intelligence gathered from captured Council facilities, and the evidence they uncovered was damning, beyond anything they had expected. The Council had systematically oppressed dozens of developing species over the past millennium, and had secretly eliminated several races that showed too much promise. Humanity's war of survival had accidentally become a war of liberation for half the galaxy. Kyle Brooks accepted the surrender of the remaining Council fleet without firing another shot because resistance had become pointless. The aliens who had once commanded respect throughout known space were now begging for mercy from the humans they had tried to crush. The irony was not lost on anyone present, and even human commanders felt some sympathy for their defeated enemies. Speaker Morden requested a meeting with human leadership to discuss terms for ending the conflict, and Helen Carter agreed to negotiations, aboard a neutral station in deep space. The Council's position was hopeless, but they still controlled hundreds of systems and billions of lives. A negotiated settlement would be better for everyone than continuing a war that could only end one way. The peace conference lasted 2 weeks, while representatives from dozens of species gathered to witness the end of Council rule and the beginning of something entirely new. Helen Carter presented humanity's demands, which were surprisingly moderate, given their complete military victory. Humans wanted justice and reform rather than conquest and revenge. The new galactic government would be a confederation based on consent rather than coercion, and every species would have a voice proportional to their contribution, rather than their age or military power. The Council's authoritarian hierarchy would be replaced by democratic institutions that protected the rights of all members regardless of their technological level or political influence. Admiral Morrison personally arrested Executor Thane Jewell and other council leaders who were responsible for war crimes against human civilians. The trials that followed would be conducted according to human legal principles, but with judges from multiple species to ensure fairness. Justice would be served, but it would be tempered with mercy for those who had acted under orders. Amy Price's quantum virus had permanently changed the technological balance in the galaxy by proving that even the most advanced systems could be vulnerable to creative attacks. Her work led to new defensive technologies that would prevent similar weapons from being used in the future, but also established human dominance in information warfare for generations to come. Several council species formally requested protection and alliance with humanity rather than risk being abandoned in the chaos of governmental collapse. The Serpentine Coalition, led by Councillor Vrix, became the first former council member to join the new human-led confederation, and their example was quickly followed by others who saw the benefits of cooperation over domination. Maya Lopez was promoted to Chief Technology Officer for the new Galactic Confederation and given resources to develop innovations that would benefit all member species equally. Her work on quantum systems led to communication networks that were more efficient and secure than anything the Council had possessed, while being immune to the kind of attack that had destroyed their empire. Dan Rivers established the Galactic Defense Corps as a military force dedicated to protecting member worlds from external threats and internal oppression. The new organization was based on human military doctrine, but incorporated the best ideas from allied species to create something stronger than any single race could have built alone. Never again would one species be able to dominate all others through superior firepower. Dr. Torres continued his psychological warfare research, but redirected it toward understanding how different species could work together more effectively. His studies of alien psychology helped design governmental structures that accommodated the needs and preferences of vastly different cultures while maintaining unity of purpose and shared goals. President Karen Hayes addressed the first session of the Galactic Confederation Assembly and spoke about humanity's vision for the future. The new government would be based on the principle that all intelligent species deserved freedom and opportunity to reach their full potential without interference from those who claimed to know better. The age of imposed authority was ending, and the era of cooperative growth was beginning. The transformation was not without challenges, as former council worlds struggled to adapt to democratic governance after centuries of authoritarian rule. Some species found it difficult to make decisions without being told what to do, while others went too far in the opposite direction and refused to accept any limitations on their behavior. Human advisors worked patiently to help everyone find the right balance. Helen Carter became the first Secretary General of the Galactic Confederation and spent her time traveling between member worlds, helping to resolve disputes and build trust between former enemies. The job was enormous, but she had the satisfaction of knowing that every problem she solved made the galaxy a better place for billions of beings. The Council's greatest mistake had been believing that age and technology automatically conferred wisdom and authority. They had learned too late that true leadership came from earning respect rather than demanding submission. Humanity had not set out to conquer the galaxy, but had been forced to save it from those who would have crushed all hope of progress and freedom. The fire they had unleashed had burned away an ancient tyranny and made room for something better to grow in its place.